Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from ToLoveHonorAndVacuum.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based, biblical advice for your marriage and sex life. And it is the last Thursday of the month. And so this is a Start Your Engines where it's more focused on the guys, but women, I think you're really going to enjoy this one too.
Yes.
I do have my daughter joining me for the first part of this podcast.
Hi.
At the point where this airs, we don't know if
I won't be this massive and pregnant anymore or not. We're pre-recording a bunch because, frankly,
baby's coming.
Anyone who's watching on YouTube can see we are on a time crunch.
Yes.
So we're pre-recording a bunch, so we have no idea if, you'll have a granddaughter yet or not.
But hopefully we will.
Yeah.
So today we want to talk about how to be sex positive without being
creepy.
Yes, because creepy is no, sex positive is yes. and how we can be explicit enough that we're helpful with what we write about when we write about sex, because we want to be helpful without crossing the line into something which is
like voyeuristic
and icky. And so we're going to be looking at a number of examples of books, some that have done this well, some that haven't, and just show you how we think it should be done. Consider this podcast just free advice for anyone who works in the marriage and sex realm, who speaks in it, who publishes in it, because often the problem is that men especially, and guys, I'm not trying to insult you here, but men especially don't necessarily understand how some of the things which they don't have a problem with come across to women.
Yes.
And especially when we're writing about sex, we need to be super careful about that.
And by the way, this is not just our personal opinion. Like, this is a whole thing that's discussed in terms of the male versus the female gaze in movies, the male versus female voice in writing, especially in romance and like fantasy novels. So like this is a well-documented thing.
Yeah. And so when we are writing about sex in the Christian sphere, and I mean sex advice, what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're being healthy and we're pointing people to something which makes them feel comfortable and empowered and excited about sex without feeling icky, because icky is the opposite of what you want.
Yes, it's not exactly the most aphrodisiac.
Yeah. And we also want to make sure that we aren't objectifying, especially women, although men can also be objectified.
Obviously.
We want to treat everybody as if they are whole people made in the image of God and honor them for that. So to give you the classic example of a book that did this really badly, which has been just so that you can see what we're talking about as we start this podcast. And this book has been criticized massively for this, and yet they left it in their new edition, 2020, the 20th anniversary edition, Every Man's Battle.
Yes. And honestly, we'll just read it. Then I have a thought I want to share.
Okay. And what we're going to read would be considered soft porn. And we do want to put a little bit of a warning there. We are going to be doing some excerpts in this podcast that are just a little bit erotic and creepy. So we're going to ask Katie, who's editing this, to just every time we're going to read something especially bad, she'll just put a time stamp telling you just fast forward to that time stamp if you don't want to hear it.
Yeah, because we know we have a lot of readers or listeners who have struggled with like erotica and stuff in the past. And so if you just have a particular, just weakness or something in this area, you don't need to test your strength.
Right. Okay, so this is literally the very first chapter of Every Man's Battle. It is the very, very first story of Every Man's Battle.
Yeah, it's like the first page.
This is what opens the book.
Hi listeners, editor Katie here with your content warning. I just wanted to say really quickly that there are two examples on this podcast where I'm going to be coming on and saying, hey, just feel free to skip over this section if you'd rather not listen to this explicit example. But we just want to make it clear that when you are skipping ahead, you're just skipping over the examples being read in their entirety, but you're landing in a discussion of the examples where some of the phrases that are weird and sexually charged and potentially pornographic are still going to be mentioned. So we just want to make it clear that, if I was to come on every single time where it's like, okay, skip ahead because something weird's about to be said, I'd be coming on every 2 minutes, which nobody needs that while listening to this podcast. We just wanted to make that clear for those of you who might be interested in using the skip ahead timestamps. And with that being said, Sheila is about to read an explicit example from Every Man's Battle, so feel free to skip ahead 1 minute from this point.
And Steve Arterburn is talking about a time where he caused a collision because he was watching a jogger. And he says, I never intentionally set out to be girl watching that day, but I spotted her about 200 yards ahead and to the left. She was jogging towards me. My eyes locked onto this goddess-like blonde, rivulets of sweat cascading down her tanned body as she ran at a purposeful pace. Her jogging outfit, if it could be called that, before the days of sports bras and spandex, was actually a skimpy bikini. As she approached on my left, 2 tiny triangles of tie-dyed fabric struggled to contain her ample bosom. I can't tell you what her face looked like. Nothing above the neckline registered with me that morning. My eyes feasted on this banquet of glistening flesh as she passed on my left, and they continued to follow her lithe figure as she continued jogging southbound. And then he talks about how he caused a collision. Okay.
So I do want to say that when we say that a lot of times men don't seem to understand what women find acceptable versus what women find a little bit violating, we have to say here, there is a whole generation of Christian men who grew up thinking that Every Man's Battle was a God-ordained, healthy book on sex.
Yes.
So, like, if you don't really understand, like, the intricacies here, like, there is a level where, like, the culture failed you and kind of groomed you to objectify.
Because look at how he describes her. My eyes feasted on banquets of glistening flesh. It struggled to contain her ample bosom.
Yeah.
Like, this could be a description in soft porn.
Yeah, this could be in an erotic novel. But also, like, this is a woman who's jogging. Like, why don't you think about, oh, like, she's exercising? Or, like, why is that story even necessary? This man could have even said, I really struggled with lust in the past to the point that, you know, I watched a jogger and caused an accident because I couldn't keep my eyes on the road.
Yeah,
that's
that
how
would have
broken
been
I
fine.
was.
But that would have been fine. But instead, what he did, and this is really important, is he invited other people into his emotional experience and then asked them to feel it with him.
Yep. So he drew a whole picture. He didn't tell the story of what happened. What he did was he, in essence, forced you to join into the story.
And that's what we're talking about here. That's the problem. And especially with Every Man's Battle, you'll see this theme continuing throughout the book, is that they really only address women in terms of either their body parts or their relationship to other men. They very rarely, if ever, describe a woman in terms of her personality or just her personhood. And so this is major objectification. And it just seems odd that a book where the purpose is to get over lust would objectify women in
such
that
a way.
And it makes you wonder if they really understand how to get over lust.
Or even what lust actually is.
And we will leave it at that.
We will.
But, so here's the question as we're approaching this, when we're looking at other Christian books writing about sex. How can you tell when what you're writing crosses a line into erotica and porn and when what you're writing is simply sex positive?
Yes.
And the definition that I would use is, are you using emotional language where you are inviting people to and by emotional language, I mean language that invites people in to experience something with you sexually.
Yeah, like when he said the rivulets of sweat dripping off of her glistening body and that kind of thing. Like that, none of those are emotional words. Like, didn't say scared, happy, but like what it does is it gives you a mental picture and it immerses you into the objectification of the person.
Yeah. So it gives a story with such detail that you are invited to experience sexually what the authors are describing.
Yeah.
And that's when things can get into erotica. So it's not that the problem is not explicit language.
No, not at all.
The problem is, are they asking you to participate in your mind emotionally with a sexual escapade?
Yeah. Could you be there in the story? Like and that's why if Arterburn had just said, my lust struggle was so bad that I caused an accident because I was watching a jogger instead of the road. You can totally see the storyline of what happened, and he makes the right point, but you aren't invited to emotionally engage with the jogger's boobs.
Yeah. Yeah, and joggers' boobs should be off the table. None of us should be thinking about the joggers' boobs. Okay, so here's another example, and this one's from a recent book that was just published, Married Sex by Gary Thomas and Deborah Felita. This is from a chapter that they wrote together, so we don't know who actually wrote this. Presumably they did it together, whatever. This is real explicit, so Katie, why don't you tell everybody where they can join back in if they don't want to hear it?
Yeah, feel free to skip ahead about 55 seconds.
So this one I found particularly problematic. I'm just going to read it for you. Ready?
Okay.
Liam was reading a book in bed when his freshly showered wife, completely naked, walked seductively up to the bed and sat down between his legs, her back leaning against his chest. "You can keep reading if you want," she said, "but I think I'll just sit here a while." Liam doesn't even remember putting the book down, but he does remember joyfully running his hands over his wife's body and then feeling her hand reaching for him from behind. He also remembers how instantly excited he became. The feeling of his chest against her bare back, her neck and hair level with his lips, her body open to him in front, giving his hands free rein, and his wife responding so quickly. They started and finished in that position with Liam leaning against the headboard the entire time. Ugh, I'm sorry. I just can't.
And this is a passage which a lot of reviewers have picked up on, saying this is really inappropriate.
Yeah, it is erotica. This is erotica.
Here's one of the ways you can tell. Okay. First of all, it's definitely inviting you in because it's using a lot of emotional language. It's describing everything from point A to point B. But also, what's kind of interesting, as your husband picked up on when you read it, is you're not actually sure what they're doing. I mean, you can sort of read between the lines, but if they're trying to teach you, if they're trying to teach you a sex position to use, because this is in the
chapter on positions,
they haven't actually spelled it out.
Well, and also, it kind of sounds like they didn't actually have intercourse. They were just manually stimulating each other in a new position.
Think they did.
I don't know. This is the point, though. We are two people who write about sex for a living, and we can't be 100% sure what exactly went down here. And so, what's the point of the story other than to titillate and to convince you, to get you, in essence, horny enough to be convinced that yes, this is what I want to.
And interestingly, I think Gary and Deb actually knew this about this passage, because here's what Gary wrote on his blog when he's talking about the book when it launched. He says, "One caveat. Both Deb and I believe this is a book meant for married or nearly married couples. We've had a number of readers tell us it really got them in the mood. It might be the many stories we recount from others. It might just be the subject matter. But as a pastor and counselor, we don't want to cause anyone to stumble, so we don't recommend this book for singles." Here's the thing. When people read Christian books about sex, one of the reasons that they're choosing Christian books is that they don't want erotica.
Yeah.
Like, they are choosing books that can help them and can help them see sex in a great way and get excited about sex. But there's a difference between getting excited about sex and getting excited.
Yes.
And that's what we need to be careful of, because when you read an erotic passage in a book where you didn't expect there to be an erotic passage, that's actually a form of violation.
It does feel very violating. And I think that this is why there's a difference between, for instance, let's talk about a product that we actually recommend quite a bit that is often quite a bit going to turn people on, in essence. The Intimately Us app.
Yes.
So the Intimately Us app is when we've talked about it a lot, where couples download it, and it's kind of like a app to help you spice up your love life.
Yes.
Right? And they talk about really explicit stuff, and they have prompts to do this or that, and they use very erotic language. But here's the difference: you're opening up the app expecting to then be doing sexy stuff, expecting to have fun with your spouse, but also the app has all these algorithms and stuff to make sure that every single time any erotic language is used, it substitutes in your spouse's name. It makes it incredibly personal to each of you. It's not like the app is listen to the story about Caitlin and Dustin and how hot and heavy they got when they smashed against the headboard. Yeah. It's not like that at all. It might be have your spouse's name lean up against the headboard and do these kinds of things. Watch how they respond when your hands go down their body.
Yeah.
That's very different than listen in on this person's sex life. It's inviting you to be a voyeuristic kind of experience.
And so we have no problem getting explicit. I even created a product called Sexy Dares, where there's 25 dares you could do. They're very explicit. You read it, and
And
sure, it'll get you in the mood. There's no problem with that.
Yeah.
But the difference is you're expecting it, and in a book, you're not.
But not only that, you're expecting it, but it's also, once again, you're not peeping in someone else's bedroom window.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference as well. You're not peeping into someone else's bedroom window. That's what I have a really big problem with.
Yeah.
With this kind of thing, is it feels like we are all getting, like the person who's reading it, who's getting titillated, right? Who's getting aroused. You're getting aroused at someone else's sexual experience.
Yes.
And that's what's bizarre to me. Mm-hmm. That's what seems very inappropriate, because that is, in essence, just pornography or erotica.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's such a thing called arousal non-concordance.
Yep.
Where your body and your mind don't meet up. Like your arousal level from one doesn't match the arousal level from the other. Mm-hmm. So for instance, when you read this, you know, your body could start to get aroused, but your mind doesn't want to.
Yeah.
And by the way, that also was what happens quite frequently, just as an aside, during sexual assault, is that because the fight and flight and freeze response, trauma response is so heightened, that part of your brain is so heightened, you're actually more likely in some ways, some people have found that your body will respond physically, and then you start to feel like, because I became aroused, I actually wanted it, or I consented in some way, and that's not true.
And that's especially oftentimes the case for male victims of sexual assault, which is one of the reasons that they just don't report, or
because
they don't talk about it.
Because they feel like, well, I got an erection, so I must have wanted it. Like, I can't be assaulted, but actually men can be assaulted. Yeah. And so we need to be aware of arousal non-concordance. And as an author or a speaker, because this can happen at conferences too, we have a responsibility not to take people unwittingly into a sexual encounter that they didn't want to have or were expecting.
This is the same reason why we have rating systems on movies, and why. You can't just suddenly have someone watch a movie and then not warn them that there's graphic sex scenes in it.
Yeah. And speaking of personal stuff, and this one I really feel strongly about, and it's a really awkward one to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay? We need to be very careful how we speak about our spouses.
Yeah.
When we write books, and how we speak, like, that we honor our spouse.
Yep.
Because the thing is, when you talk about your spouse in sexual ways, you are inviting other people to look at them that way.
Yeah.
And there's no problem with talking about your sexual story. And it's, I've talked about my sexual story a ton. Rebecca did, like in Great Sex Rescue, we talked about our sexual story. But what we talked about was not the physical aspect of it, but instead the emotional aspect.
Yeah, like I didn't want anyone to ever be able to picture my husband.
Yeah.
Like, it's, ew.
And that's a really good rule of thumb, is that you never want to share anything that people could picture. So in the Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex, I tell the story of the night that our son died, and how we returned home from the hospital and how sex happened. But it was completely focused on the emotion of it and the intimacy of it. I said nothing about the physical aspect of it. Joanna shared in the Great Sex Rescue about her experience with sex after her life-threatening miscarriage and the grief that she was in. But it was, again, about the emotional aspect of sex. And it's not that you can't talk about the physical aspect, but you need to do it in, like, for instance, like if you're telling the story of how you had a hard time reaching orgasm when you first got married, you know, there was one Saturday where we tried everything under the sun, and by everything, I mean everything, and until we finally got there and there was much rejoicing. Like, that would be no problem to say.
Yeah.
As long as elsewhere in the book you explain what everything is. Like, assuming that elsewhere in the book you talk about all the different ways that a woman can reach orgasm, so people do know what you're talking about.
Yeah, or else, like, you send them to another resource that explains what everything is.
Yeah.
Kind of
So it's like they don't need to know what everything is right there in the middle of your story, because it's elsewhere in the book. But then you're not inviting them to picture anything.
Yes.
So you're not saying he spent 3 hours on oral.
But no, even that, like, the equivalent of that with this, like, Liam headboard story is he spent 3 hours flickering his tongue specifically through these parts of my labia. Like it's disgusting how much detail there. It's just not appropriate.
It's not appropriate when you're talking about yourself or your spouse. And so,
or anyone. No one needs to, anyway, it's just like, when you want to talk about the specific aspects of sex, the specific how to make oral sex feel good, how to make a hand job feel good, how to manually stimulate a woman, all these different things. You don't talk about it in terms of people's stories. We talk about it in terms of like generalities, like many women find X. Here's exactly
Studies
what that
show
means.
that 42% of women, like the University of Sussex study in 2013 found that 43% of women really enjoy X.
Y,
okay? Like you talk about it in very clinical terms. And it works. Yeah. Okay, so I want to give an example. This is an awkward example from, again, Married Sex.
Yeah.
Which a number of people have commented online already in reviews for the book, which people found very disturbing. This is in Gary's chapter, and he writes, a woman's sexual interest tends to fluctuate according to the time of the month or her mood. I learned this early on when Lisa and I were young newlyweds. At certain times, her nipples were like super-powered, high-octane sexual excitement boosters. Yeah. 24 hours later, if my hands reached within 10 inches of those nipples, it was like splashing cold water in her face.
And first of all, the point he is making, unlike in the Jack and the Headboard one, we actually can see what point this story is telling.
And it's a good point.
And it's a great point. It's an important point. The idea that, a woman is not a vending machine. You can't just press the buttons and get the same response every time.
Yeah.
However, in what universe is it okay to say that about your wife?
Yeah, and there's just this
We're
one's
not going to
awkward
harp
to
on
talk
this
about because this is an actual person, but I just feel that it's inappropriate to invite anyone to picture your spouse's body
in
parts
a pornographic way. I'm sorry, that is a pornographic way.
Because what you could simply say is, we learned early on our marriage that my wife liked certain...
Or you could just say, we, like many couples, learned early on that what I did on Tuesday wasn't going to work on Thursday. It was
that
about
certain
their response.
erogenous zones, even especially, you could even say especially her breasts. If you wanted to get like that specific, that would be all right. But just this kind of emotional language is really...
Actually, I'm sorry, but there's no reason to call a woman who, by the way, people know by name and can picture because they know exactly who it is. We didn't change names here.
Yeah.
There's no reason to call her particular nipples super-powered, high-octane sexual excitement boosters. Like, that is a pornographic thing. Now, I think he was trying to make a joke. Let's be honest here, too. And I think this is what often happens, is I think that there's... humor is difficult with sex because it's so easy to cross a line. And I'm sure that we've done it before, too. Like, we're not saying, like, oh, everyone... Like, we're perfect here. But I'm just saying, like, I think that this is a really easy mistake to make. And I think if you were going to make a joke about it, here's how I would do it, right? So if you want to make the same point, even using the same words...
Okay.
But make it into a joke. First of all, you don't talk about how it's you and your wife.
Right.
Okay? First of all, what you say is, you know what, guys? We're going to talk about what gets her going, and I'm going to be honest with you. Some of y'all are treating nipples like they are some super-powered, high-octane sexual excitement boosters, and you're just going right in there with the twiddling and the biting and the pinching.
And the twisting.
And really, sometimes that's just going to be like a splash of cold water in her face, because you got to do it at the right time.
And the right time of the month.
And so, like, you're using those kinds of... I think he was using that whole... over-the-top pornified kind of language to make a joke. And I think you can do it, but it has to be separate from a person. And also the joke kind of has to be not on the woman for having a body.
Yeah, and here's another example, again, where this was a little bit iffy.
Yeah, I don't like this one either.
So he's talking about... this is Gary again, talking about how early on in their marriage, they got the opportunity to go to a hotel. And this was really exciting. They had little kids at home. Their house was very small. It was difficult to just let loose, which is great. This is totally true. We're all good.
Yep.
Up to now.
So here's what he says. This is where it starts to get problematic. I'll tell you where. Add to all this my passion to spend as much time as possible with my kids, and exercise was something I used to do. But none of that mattered in the moment. It was intense. I was gonna have sex with my wife in a hotel. We wouldn't have to be quiet. Lisa wouldn't have to bite a pillow. No young voice would yell out at exactly the wrong moment for a drink of water or because a shadowy monster lurked in their room. And I'm going to say the entire story I thought was said really well. It was funny. It was relatable. The only sentence was Lisa wouldn't have to bite a pillow.
Yeah.
Once again, we have someone's wife being objectified and written in a way that you can picture in a pornographic way.
Yeah, because he didn't say it, like, even if he had said, I wouldn't have to bite a pillow, I'd still have problems with that, because I don't want to picture Gary having to bite a pillow.
But at least he's the one.
But at least he's doing it to himself.
Yeah.
To do this to your wife is really problematic, and a lot of male authors have done this.
But especially since, like, it even comes after the sentence, we wouldn't have to be quiet. So what's the goal of adding Lisa wouldn't have to bite a pillow?
You don't even need that sentence.
Yeah, it's the only goal is to show, in essence, how good the sex was going to be. Once again, making it hot for people, and the goal should never to make a story hot.
Yeah, and it's just really, really important that male authors, male pastors, male speakers do not ever use language that invites anybody to picture their wife
in a sexual way. I think this is where we're in the whole sex positivity that's gone a bit too far, because in our goal as the church to remove shame from sexuality, we've also thrown off, in cases like these, we've thrown off all modesty
and dignity.
Yeah. Like, and it's like, you don't need to be ashamed of the fact that, sex is so good you have to bite a pillow to keep from
That's
waking
awesome.
up kids. Like,
way to
good
go.
For you. Way to go.
We have an orgasm course, people. Like we're all into orgasms. We totally are.
I don't care. I do not care. But the difference is that we still need to have privacy and modesty about these things, because that's how we also respect each other's dignity.
Yeah.
And, like, there comes a point when, like, this is something that's supposed to be private.
Yeah.
And the private parts are, like, how exactly your spouse responds sexually. Like, what their body is doing, what their body looks like. Like, you wouldn't want someone to see your wife's nipples or to picture her in the throes of an orgasm. So why would you write about what she does in those situations?
Yeah. So we just found that problematic, and there's many other examples of that. I want to get into now how to give explicit directions well.
Yeah.
So
we don't just want to critique. We want to actually do something positive here.
Because, again, like, we are not saying that you cannot be explicit. In fact, we think you should. And my books are full of explicit stuff. It's just, again, that we want to do it in a way that does not invite anyone into a sexual encounter, and especially does not invite anyone to picture you in a sexual way. Very, very important. So let me give you an example of someone who did it well and someone who did not. So let's just turn to Sheet Music for a minute by Kevin Lehman.
Yeah, and some of you might remember this whole section from our previous podcast on this.
Yes. So first of all, he calls his penis Mr. Happy.
Which makes me uncomfortable.
Yes.
As I have said, I don't want to know what your penis is called.
No, and there's no reason why I should know that Kevin Lehman calls his penis Mr. Happy, and
it doesn't make me a more educated person in things I wanted to be educated in, I guess.
Yeah. So here we go. Mr. Happy likes to be kissed. Nothing puts a smile on his face like a loving wife's oral caress.
Mr. Happy makes me sad.
Mr. Okay, you know what? This would be really easy to do, to simply say, most guys really enjoy oral sex. That's all you need to say.
Yep.
Bam.
That's it.
You've said it. Like, most guys really enjoy it. Let's keep going here. Here's something many women don't realize. The underside of the penis is more sensitive than the top side. That's fine.
Great.
One long, luxurious lick here in the teasing phase, and your husband will be grabbing his pillow and wriggling around in delight. No.
Why don't you just say, you can experiment with this by, using your tongue. You can give explicit instructions of saying one long, luxurious lick. Like, the alliteration and the whole, like, why do you have to say he's going to be squealing in delight and wriggling with his pillow or something? Like, just say and watch the effect it has on your spouse.
Yeah. Then one of his headlines is making your wife bite the pillow. So I'm not sure, like, if Gary
got that from Lehman.
Kind of. It's just it's odd how it's in both. But anyway.
Well, it's also a very, very common porn trope as
well. I don't know. Here we go. Here's a particularly nice position for a man giving oral sex to his wife. Facing her feet, slide your right hand under her bottom. Your fingers are right there, waiting to do a little dance on your wife's genitalia, and your mouth has full access to her most pleasurable regions. The edges of her clitoris and the folds of the labia are all there for your fingers and tongue to work together.
The whole, like, waiting to do a little dance on your wife's genitalia, that's the one that's so problematic. It's like, what does that mean? Are you just going, like, are you just going to play Fior Elise up there? Like,
yeah.
Like, it's like, what's going, do. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, like, again, like, what you would say is, like, giving explicit instructions, like, while you're, performing oral sex, you can also use manual stimulation at the same time and then insert, quite honestly, a very clinical explanation of what's happening. That would be perfectly fine. It would actually be more explicit, more educational, and more direct than what he's saying here.
Yeah, like there's several points where he's talking about how to make your wife feel good, where he calls her clitoris tender little friend. Instead of just clitoris, reach around and feel her tender little friend. When you've got her really wanting it and you provide that soft, sensual kiss, you can make her start biting the pillow for fear she'll wake up the kids. Again, that sounds a lot like it's like, it's inviting people in emotionally, and it's just not necessary.
Yeah. And I will say, I find that Kevin Lehman's descriptions in sheet music are far less offensive than Gary's, because I actually find that they are at least educational.
Yeah, like at least he's telling you how to do it, like step by step. Whereas the whole Liam thing, again, we're not even sure what it was.
We're not even sure what it was. You just leave it feeling like you just saw someone having sex.
Now, here is his needs, her needs.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of problems with this book. We've talked about a lot of the different things that we have problems. This is actually something they do really well.
Yeah, they actually seem to do this pretty well.
They have a section on how to make a woman reach orgasm and how to make her feel good. Let me just read you this. Once a woman decides to be aroused, and they go into how her mental state has to be there, et cetera, et cetera. She's ready to receive and respond to appropriate tactile stimulation, such as the caressing of her body, especially the breasts and nipples, and stimulation of the area surrounding the clitoris. The very same stimulation given to an unreceptive woman does not arouse her sexually at all. It becomes a source of great irritation to the woman who has chosen not to be aroused. When intercourse begins, a woman needs to sustain strong stimulation to her clitoris and vaginal opening. A woman learns to create this more intensive stimulation by, 1, contracting her, I don't even know how to say this, pubococcygenes, whatever, muscle. It's the, what do we call it, the PBC muscle or something, which tightens the vagina on the inserted penis, thrusting her pelvis rapidly and assuming a position that increases pressure on the clitoris and resistance to the penis and the vaginal opening.
Yeah, like we're not thrilled about the whole thing, like a woman has to decide to be able to be aroused because it kind of takes the responsibility off of him. But the whole idea of like literally describing how to make intercourse good for a woman is good there.
Yeah, and he, at least he's using clinical terms. Now, I think that might be a little bit too clinical. I would have been, and in our books, I actually think we did this quite well in The Great Sex Rescue. We just didn't want to read our own excerpts.
It kind of seems self-congratulatory. Yeah. It seems weird.
But we're just saying it's very simple to say things like clitoral stimulation is very important. Usually women like the clitoris being rubbed back and forth. You want to approach the clitoris from the top, not from the bottom, because the urethra doesn't like to be touched. Like you can describe these things really well.
I'm going to be honest. I when I was putting together the exercises and worksheets and lessons for the Orgasm Course about how exactly to touch a clitoris, there are diagrams. Yeah. There are very, very specific instructions. It's quite clinical, and it's okay to give clinical specific instructions. In fact, there's a lot of people who, because they saved sex till marriage and they don't have like any history with porn or anything, a lot of people, they don't have any real education in this, and that's not like a flaw. Like that's not something that reflects badly on you. Like we need the specific instructions and the specific information so that you know, like, what are the different parts of the penis?
Yes.
You know, like what does a woman's genitalia look like?
Yes.
You know, because
no problem with that.
Exactly. Like we need to actually, I think, give even more specific instructions than what we're giving. But the headboard and the Jack story, or Liam and the headboard story, doesn't actually give you any more instructions.
Yeah, because what you want to do is use explicit language without using emotional language. Because when you use the emotional language, it just can feel icky, because people are reading your book to learn, and you can be extremely sex positive while still being clinical. In fact, if you read secular books, they are not being emotional about this stuff. Like Come As You Are, which is a very famous book by Emily Nagoski, which talks about a woman's orgasm and a woman's desire, does not use emotional language, but it's been found to be one of the most helpful books for so many women. So it's not like you need this. It's not like this is only Christians. Like secular books actually do this quite well. It's Christian books that don't do it well, because I think we're mistaking sex positivity with
A total lack of modesty.
A total lack of modesty, and that's too bad. So for instance, in a section where Gary Thomas is talking about how you can give hand jobs when you're postpartum or on your period, he talks about why a husband might like a hand job, because a woman was saying, well, why he could just do it himself. I mean, he's more used to doing this than he is with me. Like he could do it better. And so Gary's explaining why men actually prefer hand jobs from their wives than masturbating. Here's some of the things that he says that the men really like: the sound of your moans and whispers, the smell of your skin or perfume, the wetness between your legs brushing up against his thigh, your excitement as his excitement builds. Okay, I have a rule. This is just a rule I've used for myself, but I find it works really well when I'm writing sex books. There is never a reason to say the word wetness or the word hardness. No, because you can say lubrication and you can say erection. And when there is a more clinical word to use, you should use that more clinical word, because it's not emotional. You do not need to say her wetness against his thigh. You can just say her lubrication.
Yeah,
it's quite simple.
He can feel you becoming lubricated as you become more aroused.
Yeah, or even he can feel you becoming even more wet, like more lubricated, and then in brackets meaning more wet. That would be fine, okay? Yeah. But you do not say wetness. And this is another important thing. When you are a man writing to a mixed audience,
yes,
you need to be super careful. Like, women can get away with things writing to other women that men cannot get away with writing to women.
And that's not because of sexism. It's not. It's because as a woman, you are the vulnerable person often when you're talking to men about sex. You know, women are the ones who are entered.
Yes.
And also we are in a society where women are the ones who are objectified, who are leered after more often, who are like women are the ones who walk to their cars with keys between their fingers and having their location constantly sent off to their significant other or their parents. Like,
yeah, women are just simply more vulnerable. And so we need to be careful as a man when you're talking to women that you don't use inappropriate language. And so here's just a simple test, okay? If you were in a small group setting, could you say the things that you're writing in this book?
Yeah.
And if you couldn't, then you're probably crossing a line. If you cannot say the things that you are writing in a book to a mixed audience, like to a mixed group of people in person, you probably should not be putting them in a book. It's just awkward and it's just wrong, okay?
Yeah, like a woman could actually write something quite... You know, like if you were reading like Emily Nagoski's book, for instance, had really, really specific instructions in there that also were like, by the way, women, you're going to get it. It's going to be good. You're going to feel awesome. And she was using some more explicit and erotic language. It's a girl giving you a girl hype up talk.
Yeah.
It actually has a very different feel. A man telling a woman, you know what? He's going to touch you in this place and it's going to feel awesome and you're going to be writhing around in the bed and you're going to not know what hit you and it's going to feel fantastic. It's very different than the woman saying the exact same thing. Like, you're going to go up to your husband, he's going to touch you in this way and you are going to have like explosions go off in your head. Just hype yourself up. It's going to feel great. Because it's like a girl hype up talk.
Yeah.
Versus a man picturing you sexually.
Yeah. And that's what happens is when men use this emotional language, it feels like they are entering into your sex life. Yeah. And women do not want another man entering into their sex life, and they certainly don't want to enter into another male author's sex life. And so we just need to figure out how to be sex positive without being creepy. And I think the answer is just to be more clinical.
Yeah.
You know, you can talk about, hey, you know what, guys? Most women really enjoy the clitoris being rubbed, and you need to learn how to do that more. That's not a problem. Yeah. But saying, guys, if you want your wife to bite the pillow and to writhe and moan under your amazing caress, then you need, like, no.
It's not necessary.
Yeah. And so that's just our little thing, our little rule. Don't ever say anything that could allow someone to picture you. Don't ever use the word wetness if you could use the word lubrication.
And if you're telling a story, tell it in the least detail possible and make sure it has a very, very applicable and educational result. Like moral. Which means the Liam headboard story just absolutely needs to be cut.
It does. Needs to go.
No purpose there. The main kind of takeaway that I get from a lot of this erotic kind of language that people use is, they might actually very well be comfortable saying these kinds of things in a mixed group setting, but that doesn't mean that they should be. Because I think that our emphasis on getting rid of shame has, in essence, it feels to me like almost the goal is to be able to get aroused with other people around and to be like super horny or like turned on or super sexual around other people and feel no shame because we know that God is okay with sex. And that's not actually the goal of healthy sexuality.
Right.
The goal of healthy sexuality is not to be sexual all of the time or anywhere and feel no shame. The goal of healthy sexuality is to use our sexuality to revel in the humanness and the wonder of the person who God has given us.
Yeah.
Right? And that does mean that I don't want to be talking about arousing things with people who are not my husband.
Yeah.
Like, that's the way I honor him. And it's not because I'm a prude.
Yes, no, definitely, yes.
And same thing. Like, I wouldn't want my husband discussing how hot I was with his friends, not because he should be ashamed of having a sex life, but because that's not honoring or dignifying to my personhood. And I think that's the main difference to me.
And yet, in married sex, they actually talk about giving a hand job so well that a guy wants to brag to his friends.
Yeah, and like Gary said in another comment that he was like, it was tongue in cheek. It's like, but it's not. That's not okay. That's not an okay joke to make. That, like, if you learn how to handle his penis well enough, he'll like it so much he'll have a hard time not bragging to his buddies about how good you are in bed. That's disgusting. Yeah. That is antithetical to what healthy sexuality is.
Yeah, and again, we love sex. We write about sex.
Yeah.
Love orgasm. We want every woman to have an orgasm. We want people to have lots of sex. For
Pete's sake, I want you to have multiple orgasms, culminating in a spontaneous, a together orgasm for all we care.
Yeah, like we're all into healthy sex, but it needs to be in its proper context. And I love one comment on my Facebook page this week was, I think Jessica.
It wasn't even on yours. It was on, I think it was on Sarah McDougall's, or else it was on the Zondervan page or something.
I don't know, but somebody wrote, Sheila, can I just say that after reading your blog for years and reading a bunch of your books, I am so glad that I don't know anything about your sex life with your husband. And then my husband chimed in and said, I'm glad you don't. I want to thank our sponsors, too, for this podcast, Femile, which is a wonderful women's wellness company. They sell menstrual cups, cloth pads, but also wellness teas, and my favorite, vaginal melts. And I've been talking about these on the blog this week. They are organic vaginal melts. They're vaginal suppositories that help increase lubrication, that help with elasticity, that help with some of the problems that you can get in the vagina as your hormone levels change. So please check them out at femile.com. I will also put a link to the post talking about the changes your vagina goes through during menopause and breastfeeding and some of these other hormonal things, and show you why Femile's vaginal melts can really help. All right, I brought my husband Keith on the podcast.
Hey, everybody.
It's, being the last Thursday, we like to get more of a guy's perspective. Yeah. And this week, we had a guy's perspective on the blog.
Yes.
Because you wrote an amazing post,
yeah.
The 4 characteristics of a sexually confident man. And got lots of gushy feedback about that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, everybody. That was really encouraging.
Yeah, so what do you think? What does it mean to be sexually confident?
Yeah, I know. Actually, you asked me to do that. I'm like, okay, really? Because it's like, I guess decided to write out of what I've learned, right? I was afraid when I was writing this that it's going to come across as sort of this unattainable ideal, because it's sort of what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
And I haven't always been there too. The big thing for me was probably the second point, which is about entitlement, because I think that's something that you and I have shared before, was something that I had really bought into, that mindset that's really, in outside and inside the church, there's a real male entitlement to sex kind of idea. And I really bought into that early in our marriage, and it caused a lot of distress and unnecessary difficulty. So coming out of that was good, and giving a chance to say, hey, a sexually confident man does not need to feel entitled.
Yeah, in fact, that's the opposite of confidence. Because if sex is about you need to give me this, then you sort of feel like, well, she wouldn't give it to me if she didn't have to.
Yeah, my entitlement early in our marriage totally came out of insecurity.
Yeah.
And now that I'm not insecure, I'm able to do that. And I just want to help guys to, get to that point as well too with their wives.
Right.
Because if you're confident, you have something to offer. You know that this is not a rejection of you as a person. It's she's missing out.
Let's figure out why she doesn't want it if she doesn't want it, because you're willing to learn, you're willing to get
and that was the
better
first
at
point.
it.
And that was the first point is because that's I thought that was where we have to start. Is the whole point is you need to be able to learn, because if you already think you have all the answers, then you may think you're confident. You may fool people into thinking you're confident, but people who are confident are not afraid of new knowledge.
Yes.
People who are confident are willing to learn and willing to grow.
Yeah, because I think one of the issues too is that guys often think they're really good at sex because sex feels good for them.
Yeah.
And sex is easy for them. And so I'm good at it, what's wrong with her? But a sexually confident man isn't afraid of feedback or of learning.
Yeah, and if she says this isn't working for me, they don't take it as a personal thing. Yeah. It's okay, well then let's work on that. What else did we talk about in the article? The third one I think was about...
she is not responsible for your sin.
That was the fourth one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But yeah, basically, guys take responsibility for their own thought life, right? Because I see a lot of that, the whole every man's battle idea of all men lust. And that was the third thing, is a man is not ashamed of his sexuality.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, because this is the balance, I find. It's a problem. It's like, I see in the Christian church this mentality that we see in Every Man's Battle, where it says, we see that the natural...
Men got there naturally.
Our proclivity for sexual sin, we got there naturally, simply by being male.
Yes.
Or in Every Heart Restored, where it says men just don't naturally have that Christian view of sex.
Yes.
Like it's impossible for a man to have a Christian view of sex. Are you kidding me? Like, this is a book written by Christians for Christians saying that it's impossible for men to be Christians? Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So that was what I wanted to tackle in the second half of the article, was this balance between all men are these horrible, disgusting, vile creatures, and all women have to fix their lives because men are so bad.
Right.
But yet men are supposed to be in charge of everything. It doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah. So a sexually confident man doesn't feel ashamed of the fact that he's a man. And I don't think we should feel ashamed of the fact that we're men.
No.
And I think that a whole generation of men have been raised to think that finding women attractive is somehow sinful. And I just don't understand why we do that. When you notice a woman is attractive, that is a natural biologic thing. What your brain does with it after that is your choice.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I was saying this to you earlier this week, referencing Mark Alan Chelsky, who you had on your podcast about a year ago.
Yeah, he wrote The Wisdom of Your Heart, and we were talking about emotional maturity.
Yeah. And I loved that episode. And he talked about how emotional maturity is being able to enlarge that space between you when you feel something and when you act on that. So like if you feel angry, if you're emotionally mature, you feel angry, you punch the wall, and you think that thing made you punch the wall.
Right.
Whereas a person who's emotionally mature realizes that this is a feeling and I can process it in different ways. And you expand that space to give you time to decide how you're going to process that. Yeah. So an emotionally mature person can feel anger, but then make a very different decision than an emotionally immature person would do. And they see those things as totally different. So it's the same thing with like feelings of attraction. I mean, you naturally feel attracted to somebody. That's a biologic thing. You don't have control over that. But if you're sexually and emotionally healthy, you can expand that space between when that feeling strikes and when you do something with it, and give yourself more ability to handle it in a more mature fashion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so if I see an attractive woman, I don't naturally just think there's no point now I'm going to descend into lust because I have no other choice. That's in a very emotionally immature way of looking at that. Instead, you say, okay, well, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to turn my thoughts to my wife? Am I going to just move on with my day? What am I going to do, right?
Yeah. And a sexually confident person knows that they are able to do that. Knows that their responses, their sexuality is in their control.
And they're working on it if they're not good at it.
Yeah.
Because, we're all learning how to do things better.
Now, interestingly, we did get into a bit of discussion in the comment section in the blog about that particular point. And I thought it might be worth dwelling on a little bit more because this is such a tricky thing to talk about. Yeah. It really is. Because this is a big point I've been making for a long time, that noticing someone is attractive is not the same thing as lusting. Chapters 5 and 6 in The Great Sex Rescue were about the issues of lust and porn and how we define it in the church. And I really think that those chapters in Great Sex Rescue were actually for men too. It wasn't just rescuing women, it was rescuing men from a lot of the lies that they've been taught. Because I think in church circles, we really do teach that, like, once you notice someone is attractive, you're now tempted to lust after them, which means you're, and it's almost like there's this moving sidewalk and you can't get off of it.
Yeah, and because we have this whole idea of sin leveling in the church, right?
Yeah.
Like, even noticing the woman's attractive, you already sinned.
Yeah.
End of story.
Right. And so I was trying to free us from that and say, like, what Jesus said was looking with lust. So deliberate action combined with a deliberate mindset, that is what is sinful. But noticing someone is attractive is not a sin. It's what you do with your mind afterwards. Now, what happened was there were several women who I think have had some major issues in their marriage with their husband's porn use and with lust problems. And so they're coming at it from that perspective. And there's been a lot of betrayal and a lot of trauma in their marriages. And so they were pushing back, saying that you really shouldn't be noticing.
Yeah. I don't think they're saying you shouldn't be. I think they were saying it would be the best case scenario would be even if he never noticed.
Right. And I think they were arguing for different things. It doesn't really matter who was arguing what, but this idea, I have heard it from other people too, that if you truly love your spouse, they are your definition of beauty and you won't even notice that anyone else is attractive. And then there's some discussion of like, well, if you notice someone's attractive, doesn't that mean you're attracted to them? And your body shouldn't respond to anybody else except your spouse. And it got really quite heated and confusing, because I think that there's a lot of confusion over what we mean by noticing.
And it's a difficult topic to talk about. I mean, and to me, when I wrote the article, I was kind of worried the other way. Like, I was thinking that guys were going to feel like this was an unattainable standard for them. Like, that was I was thinking that the pushback was going to come from the other direction. And that's why I kind of ended the article by saying, like, look, we're all on a journey. We're all trying to get better. This is not a pass-fail thing.
Yeah.
We all want to get better at controlling thought lives and things like that as well too. Because I thought that pushback was kept to the side, but it all came from the other side, which is that you shouldn't even be noticing.
Yeah, or if you do notice, it shouldn't really register on any sort of sexual level. It should just be a piece of information. And I understand that when you're coming from a place of deep betrayal, but I do think it's important to ask, like, how should we be talking about this in the wider culture? Because, in their marriages, it might just be really important that he just doesn't notice. And they were saying their husbands say they don't notice, and that's what they believe healing looks like, and that's fine. And I'm simplifying what they're saying. I don't mean to put words into any particular person's mouth. And I've had the same discussion with other people coming out of porn and betrayal trauma. And some people believe you just shouldn't even notice. I actually think the science definitely shows that people notice whether someone's attractive or not. And there are certain body shapes, there are certain whatever, and some of that's cultural, some it's not, but that noticing is not done on a conscious level. It's like it's an unconscious stimuli.
I think the thing for me in this whole lust debate, which is what it basically is, right, is, there's this sin called lust. And then there's this situation where you're being tempted to lust. And then there's a situation where a thought has just entered your head. And I think sometimes we equate those three things.
Yeah.
So it's like, even if she's attractive comes into your head, you've already sinned, because they're all the same thing. And I think we do need to tease that out. That there's having a thought, then there's feeling tempted, and then there's succumbing to temptation. And I think we need to think of those things in very different ways. Because it's not fair, it's not appropriate to shame someone for having a thought, because they can't police their thoughts constantly the whole time. It's what you do with your thoughts is what's important.
And like I said, for some people in betrayal, coming out of betrayal trauma, this might be important and they might feel very strongly about this. And I have spoken to some women who do. But I think it's very important that we don't talk about it, that's the expectation for everyone. That they simply don't notice, or that they never find anyone else attractive, because that's just not realistic, and that actually can create their own problems. Like,
absolutely.
That's what we have found. Like, if you're coming out of betrayal trauma and you're raising teenagers, it's really important that you don't teach your teenagers that it's wrong to notice that someone's attractive, because when people feel like noticing someone's body shape is a sin, they can become hyper vigilant about that.
And I said this in the podcast myself before, that the only time that I've ever had lust struggles was after I read Every Man's Battle.
Yeah.
Because instead of having the mentality of, I want to treat women with respect, I don't want to stare, I don't want to be rude, I don't want to be that creepy guy. And so therefore, when I notice a pretty woman, I just kind of go, okay, well, I don't want to stare or be the creepy guy or lust, so I'm going to move on with my day. Instead I was taught, you can't even notice. Yeah. And so I spent the whole day, am I noticing? Am I looking? Am I lusting? What am I doing? And then you actually focus on it. And the thing you focus on starts to rule you, as opposed to it being something you see, you evaluate, you process, and you move on. It's a much healthier way, I think.
Yeah. And so, even if you are in a particular place in your marriage where you just have to say, it's not even right to notice, please don't expect other people to do that same thing, because that mentality is actually what creates a lot of our shame.
It may work really, really well for you.
Yes.
But it may work really, really badly for other people.
And studies do show that people do notice attraction. They do notice if someone has attractive features and attractive body. It doesn't mean that they're doing anything with that information. And so it's just important that I think we do distinguish that. I also do want to say, when you are getting over porn issues and you're in recovery, remember that male sexuality is not the problem. It's how it's been expressed and how it's been channeled.
Yeah.
And just
so the solution to having had problems in the past is not to remove a man's sexuality completely.
Yeah.
It's to redeem it.
It's to redeem it, and to be able to focus that sexuality at their wife, but also, just to be able to function in the wider world as a man.
Well, yeah, or just to teach men a more healthier view of their own sexuality, because so much of our society, and even in the church, frames male sexuality in terms of conquest, in terms of power, in terms of all these horrible dynamics which are not consistent with the Christian worldview, right?
And that it will automatically objectify.
The objectification of women is what men do. Well, you can... No, that's not true. I mean, that's not part and parcel of male sexuality. It's something men have been conditioned to do, but it's something they can also unlearn. It's like Andrew Bauman talking about the pornographic mindset.
Yeah.
We can get out of a pornographic mindset. We can have a healthy view of women and a healthy view of our own sexuality as men.
Yeah. And so I hope we get there. I'll try to remember to put a link to Andrew's post about the pornographic style of relating, because I like his dichotomies of instead of devouring beauty, you appreciate and honor beauty and things like that. And I think it's really helpful. So a tricky thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Because there is so much pain out there, and I think there's pain on both sides. There's shame that men feel, there's betrayal that women feel, and it's like, how do we talk about noticing without lusting? It's difficult, but I think we need to keep having these conversations, because we need to get to a healthy place, if that's possible. Yeah. I hope it is.
Well, and I think so, because we're still learning too. And one of the things I really appreciated in the feedback in the comments was people saying that people giving me ways of expressing this in the future that was better for them. And I think that's great, because we're all trying to do a better job every time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, as we end this podcast, just a little bit of encouragement. I'll do a really short one. This is from Neil Shorey, who is a pastor. He left a review of The Great Sex Rescue, and he was actually on the podcast just a few weeks ago. But he says, as a pastor and a victim advocate, this book resonates deeply with me in my experiences in helping couples in churches I've served. I recommend this to every pastor I know. Trust me, the women in the church are reading it and embracing it. So what will you do with it? So pastors, that's from another pastor. What are you going to do with The Great Sex Rescue? We really hope that it will bring freedom and a new way of talking about these things in a nuanced and healthy way, where we can be sex positive without being creepy and where we can talk about lust in a healthy way. So until next week on the Bare Marriage Podcast, I will say goodbye. Remember, there are links to all the things we've talked about in the post that goes along with this, and you can join us at tolovehonorandvacuum.com for our sexual confidence series. See you next week.